The house did not feel asleep. It never did. Even in the early hours, when the street outside was empty, when the sky held that pale, undecided gray that wasn't quite night and wasn't yet morning, the house felt aware, as if it had already noticed what the day would become. A wide, still shot. A quiet suburban road in Surrey, neatly trimmed hedges, identical driveways, curtains drawn with disciplined precision. No movement, no sound except the distant hum of a car passing somewhere far away. Inside one of the houses, a bedroom light glowed faintly behind heavy curtains, cut inside. Elodie Harrow lay on her side, fully dressed in sleep that looked more intentional than comfortable. One arm tucked beneath the pillow, the other resting near her face, fingers loosely curled as if she had fallen asleep mid-thought. She was awake. Her eyes stared forward, unfocused, fixed on nothing in particular, the way eyes do when the mind is somewhere else entirely. The camera holds on her face. No tears, no visible fear, just restraint, the kind that has been practiced for a long time. Beside her, Callum Wren slept on his back, mouth slightly open, chest rising and falling with steady confidence. One arm lay stretched across the mattress, occupying space even in sleep. The space between them was deliberate. Elodie did not move closer. She knew better than to misjudge the rules of proximity. The bedroom itself was immaculate. Not warm, not cold, simply controlled. Neutral tones, clean lines, nothing left unattended. Even the bedside table held only what was necessary. A lamp, a book placed squarely parallel to the edge, a phone face down. No clutter meant no evidence. No evidence meant no questions. The clock on the wall read 5:47 a.m. Elodie blinked once, then again. She shifted slowly, carefully easing herself out from under the duvet, making sure the mattress barely responded. Her feet touched the floor without sound. She stood still for a moment, listening. Callum did not stir. Only then did she straighten and walk toward the ensuite. The bathroom light clicked on softly, revealing a space as ordered as the bedroom. Towels folded with near-military neatness, bottles aligned, mirror spotless. Elodie stood before the sink and looked at herself. 36 years old. Brown hair pulled back too neatly for someone who used to forget hair ties existed. A face that once carried expression easily, now composed into something careful. She leaned closer to the mirror. Just above her collarbone, partially hidden by the neckline of her sleepwear, a faint shadow lingered beneath the skin, yellowed at the edges, almost gone. She lifted the fabric slightly. The bruise revealed itself, old enough to fade, new enough to remember. Elodie stared at it. No anger crossed her face, no shock, only recognition. She lowered the fabric again, smoothing it carefully until the mark disappeared completely. Then she practiced her expression. Neutral, calm, acceptable. She turned off the light and stepped back into the bedroom. The kettle switched on at 6:30 a.m. exactly. It always did. Elodie stood in the kitchen, already dressed, already moving with quiet efficiency. 2 mugs placed on the counter, coffee measured precisely, milk poured evenly. The house liked predictability. So did Callum. Footsteps approached from upstairs. Callum entered the kitchen freshly showered, hair styled with effortless discipline, dressed in a tailored shirt that suggested authority without effort. He glanced at Elodie briefly before looking down at his phone. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied. Their voices matched the room, controlled, restrained, low. They moved around each other with ease, bodies navigating shared space without collision. A choreography perfected over years. Callum lifted his mug, took a sip, frowned slightly. Too much milk. Elodie adjusted the mug without comment. He checked his phone again. Emails, messages, a life that acknowledged him constantly. I'll be late tonight, he said. Dinner with the firm. She nodded. All right. He looked up then. Not sharply, not accusingly, just enough to assess. You look tired, he said. I didn't sleep well. A pause followed. It wasn't concern. It was calculation. You should try harder, Callum said mildly. It affects your focus. He leaned in and kissed her cheek. Light, public, photograph ready, before picking up his coat. The front door closed with quiet finality. Elodie stood still until she heard his car pull away. Only then did her shoulders relax. Just slightly. Elodie drove through familiar streets, past houses that mirrored her own in size and ambition. This part of Surrey specialized in respectability. Lawns trimmed, cars polished, lives curated. She parked outside a low-rise building above a row of small independent shops. A florist, a dry cleaner, a cafe that smelled perpetually of burnt espresso. This place felt different, looser, temporary. Elodie turned off the engine but didn't get out immediately. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers intertwined tightly. Seeing her sister always unsettled her. Not because they were twins, though they were, identical enough to confuse strangers and fool cameras, but because Imogen Harrow had chosen a life without polish, without careful editing, a life that showed its edges. Elodie opened the car door and crossed the street. Imogen answered the door barefoot, hair damp from the shower, an oversized jumper slipping off one shoulder. You're early, she said. I was nearby. Imogen stepped aside, letting her in. The flat was warm, cluttered, lived in. A jacket thrown over a chair, a mug abandoned on the table, windows open slightly, letting in street noise. Life, uncontained. They sat on the sofa, knees almost touching. They talked about nothing important at first. Work, weather, a neighbor who played music too loudly. The kind of conversation that pretended there wasn't something heavier pressing against it. Then Imogen reached for her tea. Her sleeve rode up. The camera does not rush. Elodie notices. Her gaze sharpens instantly. Involuntary, instinctive. Purple and blue. Finger-shaped. Too fresh. The room seems to quiet. Imogen follows Elodie's eyes. It's nothing, she said quickly, tugging the sleeve down. I walked into a cupboard. Elodie didn't answer. She reached out and gently caught Imogen's wrist. Don't, Imogen said too fast. Elodie lifted the sleeve. The bruise bloomed into full view, angry, recent, impossible to explain away. Imogen smiled. It was practiced. Protective. I'm fine. Something cold settled in Elodie's chest. Who? She asked. Imogen looked away. It's complicated. No, Elodie said quietly. It isn't. Silence. Then Imogen laughed, short, brittle. You married Callum, she said. You don't get to look at me like that. Elodie stood. She crossed the short distance between them and knelt, bringing her face level with her sister's. This doesn't happen by accident, she said, and it doesn't happen once. Imogen's composure cracked, not completely, just enough. It's not all the time, she whispered, and he's under a lot of pressure. Elodie straightened slowly. In her mind, something shifted. Not violently, not dramatically, but permanently. Elodie left Imogen's building with her breath held too high in her chest. Outside, the street continued exactly as it had before. People stepped in and out of shops. A delivery van idled at the curb. Someone laughed inside the cafe. Life moved with the confidence of a world that hadn't noticed anything was wrong. Elodie walked to her car as if she belonged to this calm, but her hands shook when she turned the key. On the motorway home, the sky lowered into a dull pewter gray, the kind of weather that made everything look flat and honest. Elodie's thoughts circled without landing. Imogen's bruise, finger-shaped, fresh. The way Imogen had smiled as if the smile could cover it. The way she had defended him without even naming him. And then, worse than any of it, the way her voice had carried that familiar softness when she said, "He's under a lot of pressure." Elodie's mouth tightened. Pressure was always the excuse. At a red light, she caught sight of her own reflection in the rearview mirror. Her face looked composed. Ordinary. The sort of face that would never attract suspicion. A face that could sit through dinner parties and pretend. She lowered her eyes and remembered Callum's voice from that morning. "You should try harder. It affects your focus." Focus. That word had never been about her sleep. It had always been about obedience. The house greeted her with silence arranged into order, not the peaceful silence of comfort, the silence of discipline, the sort that suggested someone had already decided what was allowed to exist here. Elodie moved through the rooms slowly. A neat living room, sofa cushions aligned, books shelved by height and color, a thin vase of white flowers. Callum's choice. Always white, always controlled. In the hallway, a framed photograph of her and Callum at a charity gala smiled back, their faces close, his hand resting possessively at the small of her back. The image captured a version of her that looked content, a version that had learned to perform. Elodie's gaze slid to her own wrist. She could still feel how she'd reached for Imogen's arm, how natural it had been, how urgent. She could not remember the last time she'd reached for someone without first calculating the consequences. She made tea, out of habit, more than thirst. As the kettle boiled, her phone buzzed on the counter. A message. "Callum, need you to be present tonight. Hugo will be there. Don't embarrass me." Elodie stared at it. Not, "How are you?" Not, "I'm running late. Don't wait." Just instruction. And threat beneath politeness. She set the phone down, fingers still on the screen for a moment as if she could press hard enough to erase the words. Then she looked up. The kitchen window reflected her back at her. A woman in her own home, holding a mug as though she belonged there, while the house around her felt like it belonged to someone else. Elodie called Imogen. Imogen answered on the third ring, voice already guarded. "What?" "I want you to come here," Elodie said. Silence. A small exhale. "No." "Imogen?" "No," Imogen repeated. "You don't understand. You think you understand because you're married to Callum, but you don't. You've made peace with your cage. I haven't." Elodie closed her eyes. "My cage?" she repeated softly. Imogen's voice sharpened. "Don't. Don't pretend you're not living inside something. You're just better at decorating it." Elodie swallowed. "Who did that to you?" she asked again. Calm. Patient. As if calm could keep the truth from shattering them both. Imogen's answer came too quickly this time, like a reflex. "Nobody." Elodie's throat tightened. "Imogen," she said, "that bruise wasn't nobody." Imogen's voice lowered. "Drop it." "No." A pause. Long enough that Elodie heard the faint sound of traffic in the background, the way the city never truly went silent. Then Imogen spoke, quieter now. "Promise me something," she said. Elodie's chest tightened. "What?" "If it gets worse," Imogen said, "don't do anything stupid." Elodie's fingers curled around the phone. "What does that mean?" "It means," Imogen whispered, "don't come charging in like a hero. You're not built for mess. You'll get hurt." Elodie didn't answer, because she realized something in that moment. Something cold and precise. Imogen wasn't warning her about a stranger. Imogen was warning her about a man who knew how to make people doubt their own instincts. A man who would smile while doing it. By 7, Elodie was dressed. Not glamorous, not showy. Just polished in the way Callum preferred. A muted navy dress, minimal jewelry, hair smooth and controlled. Her makeup was light, practiced, enough to appear healthy, not enough to invite attention. She checked her reflection once more. The bruise near her collarbone was hidden. She had learned exactly how to hide things. In the hallway, she heard the lock click. Callum returned. He entered with the energy of someone who expected his home to reset around him. He removed his coat, loosened his tie, and looked at Elodie with swift approval. "Good," he said. "At least you look like you're listening." Elodie smiled. Small, obedient, automatic. Callum stepped closer, adjusting a strand of hair near her ear as if he were affectionate. His fingers pressed, just slightly too firm, against the side of her neck. A private reminder wrapped inside a tender gesture. "You're quiet today," he said. "I'm fine." Callum's eyes narrowed, almost amused. "That's what you always say." He took his phone from his pocket, checked the screen, then slipped it away again. "Hugo's bringing his wife," he said. "Don't be awkward." Elodie nodded. Callum watched her a moment longer, as if searching for something beneath her calm. Then he smiled. A warm, credible smile. The kind that made strangers feel safe. "Let's go." The restaurant was expensive in a way that didn't need to announce itself. Low lighting, soft linen, quiet voices. Hugo Pembroke sat at the table already, broad-shouldered and silver-haired, with the careless confidence of a man protected by reputation. His wife, Celeste, wore a pale silk blouse and a perfect expression. "Callum," Hugo said, standing to shake his hand. "Good to see you." "Elodie," Celeste added, kissing the air near her cheek. "Lovely, as always." Elodie smiled politely, taking her seat. She could do this in her sleep. Conversation moved in smooth arcs, cases, investments, a property deal in Bath. Laughs landed exactly where they were supposed to. Every sentence felt rehearsed by society. Callum spoke easily, charmingly. He listened, nodded, responded at the right moments. He played the role of the capable husband so perfectly that Elodie felt briefly unreal beside him, as if she were watching her own life on screen. At one point, Hugo asked, "Elodie, how's the charity work going?" Elodie's mouth opened. Callum's hand landed on her knee beneath the table. Not a squeeze, a clamp, a quiet warning. Say the right thing. "Elodie's been brilliant," Callum said before she could speak. "She's got a talent for making things look effortless." He smiled at her like he adored her. Elodie smiled back. Her heart beat calmly, but something inside her sharpened, making things look effortless, like bruises, like fear, like survival. Celeste leaned toward Elodie, lowering her voice slightly. "You're lucky," she murmured. "Callum's so attentive." Elodie held the smile a fraction too long. "Lucky." She heard Imogen's voice in her head. "You're just better at decorating it." They returned home after 10. Callum was in good spirits, buoyed by social approval. He poured himself a drink and loosened his tie, moving through the house like he owned the air. Elodie took off her shoes silently. Callum watched her from the doorway of the kitchen. "You did fine," he said. Elodie nodded. "Good." He stepped closer, studying her face. "But you were elsewhere." "I'm tired." Callum's mouth curved slightly. "You always have a reason." Elodie's heartbeat remained even. She realized then, quietly, almost clinically, that her fear had changed shape. It wasn't panic anymore. It was awareness. Callum reached for her wrist, turning her hand palm up with the casual intimacy of ownership. "Have you been talking to Imogen?" he asked. Elodie felt the moment tighten. "How do you know I saw her?" she asked. Callum's eyes flickered. He smiled. "I know everything," he said gently. "It's the advantage of being the only adult in this house." Elodie tried to pull her wrist back. Callum tightened his grip, just enough to remind her that her body belonged to the rules he set. "You're not going to make this difficult," he said softly. "Not tonight." Elodie met his eyes, and something in her steadied. "No," she said, voice quiet. "I'm not." Callum released her wrist, satisfied. He turned away, taking his drink with him. "Good girl." The words landed like a slap wrapped in silk. Elodie stood still until she heard him go upstairs. Only then did she move. In the bedroom, the light was low. Callum's side of the bed looked untouched until he arrived. Even his sleep seemed planned. Elodie entered the ensuite and locked the bathroom door behind her. She turned on the light. Then, slowly, she lifted her sleeve. On the inside of her wrist, fresh, red-purple, blooming. The beginnings of a bruise formed exactly where Callum's fingers had held her. Not dramatic. Not yet. But undeniable. She stared at it for a long time. Then she lifted her collar and looked at the fading mark above her collarbone again. Old bruise. New bruise. A timeline written on skin. Elodie's breath caught. Not with tears, not with hysteria, but with something sharper. Proof. For years she had held only feelings, instinct, a dread she couldn't name without sounding unstable. But this was evidence. She reached for her phone, hands steady now, and opened the camera. She took a photograph of her wrist, then another. Then she angled the camera toward her collarbone, capturing the fading bruise before it disappeared completely. Her phone made a soft click each time. The sound felt louder than it should have. She stopped, listening. Footsteps above. Callum moving. Elodie's heart didn't race. She placed the phone down carefully. Then she covered the bruises again and practiced her face in the mirror. Neutral, calm, acceptable. She turned off the light and stepped back into the bedroom. Callum was already in bed watching her. Not suspicious, not angry, just amused, like a man who enjoyed seeing someone pretend. "Elodie," he said softly, patting the mattress beside him. "Come here." Elodie lay down, careful not to touch him. Callum turned his head toward her. "You know what I like most about you?" he asked, voice intimate. Elodie stared at the ceiling. Callum continued, almost tender. "You don't make me look bad." A pause. "And you never will." His hand slid across the sheets toward her. Elodie didn't flinch, but inside, she felt it. A quiet, irreversible turn. Because she understood the truth now in a way she could no longer ignore. Callum didn't hurt her because he lost control. He hurt her to prove he had it. The next morning, Elodie waited until Callum left. When the front door closed, she went straight to the study. Callum's study was a shrine to authority. Leather chair, dark wood, awards on the wall, a framed certificate from a leadership program he'd never stopped mentioning. Elodie sat at his desk and opened his laptop. It required a password. She tried once, twice. Then she stopped. Her breath stayed steady. She wasn't here to guess. She looked down at the desk. A notepad lay there, crisp and untouched. Callum's handwriting on the top page. Reminders, numbers, names. One line caught her eye. Imogen. Sorted. Elodie's stomach tightened. She flipped the page carefully, as if paper might scream. Another line. If she causes trouble, remind her what happens. Elodie's fingers went cold. This wasn't a private thought. This wasn't anger scribbled and forgotten. This was planning. She took her phone out again and photographed the notes. 1 image, 2, 3. Then she heard something. A sound from downstairs. Elodie froze. The front door? No. The back door. A soft click. Someone was in the house. Elodie stood silently, phone in hand, and moved toward the hallway. Each step controlled, each breath quiet. At the bottom of the stairs, she saw him. Callum. Standing in the kitchen doorway. Home early. Looking at her like he'd been there longer than she'd realized. His expression was calm, almost kind. But his eyes were bright, with something private. "You're curious today," he said softly. Elodie's throat tightened. She kept her face composed. "You said you'd be at work." Callum smiled. "I forgot something." He stepped closer. Elodie held her phone behind her leg, fingers tight around it. Callum's gaze flicked downward, quick, precise. He knew. He knew she had been in the study. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He simply closed the distance until there was no space left. "I told you," he said, voice low, intimate. "I know everything." Elodie's pulse steadied into something cold. She saw it, suddenly. The shape of the trap. Not a moment of rage, a moment of ownership. Callum reached for her wrist again. Elodie didn't pull away, because now she had something she'd never had before. Proof. And proof changed the rules. Callum's fingers closed around her wrist with gentle cruelty. "Give it to me," he murmured. Elodie looked him in the eye, and, for the first time, she didn't pretend not to understand what he meant. Elodie did not move. Callum's hand remained closed around her wrist, firm, deliberate, almost gentle in its certainty. His thumb rested against the inside of her arm, exactly where the bruise would bloom later. He knew the spot. He always did. "Give it to me," he repeated softly. Elodie looked at his face. Up close, Callum Wren did not look angry. That was the mistake people made. They expected rage, loss of control, violence that announced itself. What he wore instead was patience. She understood then that this moment had not surprised him. It had confirmed something. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. Her voice was calm, almost bored. Callum smiled. It was a small smile, private, the sort never shown in public. "You've always been bad at lying," he said. "You just forget that I taught you how." He released her wrist and stepped back, giving her space as though he were generous enough to allow it. Elodie felt the sudden absence of his grip more sharply than the pressure itself. Callum gestured toward the study with his chin. "Go on," he said. "Show me what you took." Elodie didn't move. A second passed, then another. Callum's eyes hardened. Not with anger, but with disappointment. "You're forcing me to be unkind," he said. "And you know how that ends." Something clicked into place inside her. Not fear. Calculation. She walked past him, not toward the study but toward the kitchen. Callum watched her carefully, curious now. Elodie set her phone on the counter and turned it so the screen faced him. Photographs. Her wrist. Her collarbone. The notes from the study. Callum leaned in slightly, eyes scanning the images. For the first time since she had known him, his expression shifted. Not panic. Not guilt. Annoyance. "You went through my things," he said quietly. "You wrote her name," Elodie replied. "You planned it." Callum straightened. "You misunderstand," he said. "I manage situations. People like your sister don't respond to reason." "She's being hurt," Elodie said. Callum's eyes flicked to her face, sharp and warning. Careful. The word was not advice, it was instruction. She's being hurt, Elodie repeated. And so am I. Silence stretched between them. Then Callum laughed. A low, incredulous sound. You really think bruises mean something? He asked. Do you know how many women have bruises they can't explain? Do you know how easy it is to make yourself look like a victim? Elodie felt the ground tilt. Not because she doubted herself, but because she finally understood the scale of him. You won't show anyone, Callum continued, voice steady. You won't go to the police. You won't tell your friends. Because if you do... He stepped closer. I will tell them who you really are. Elodie's breath slowed. And who is that? She asked. Callum's smile returned, sharp now. Unstable, dependent, confused. A woman who drinks too much wine and forgets conversations. A woman whose sister is known for exaggeration. He leaned closer, his voice a whisper meant only for her. A woman no one believes. The words landed with precision. Years of quiet erosion distilled into a single truth. Elodie looked at him and felt something settle permanently in her chest. Not despair, certainty. You think you have control, she said. Callum tilted his head. I do. Elodie nodded slowly. Yes, she said. You do. The agreement caught him off guard. He straightened, reassured. That was his weakness. Elodie reached for her phone and calmly deleted the photos, one by one. Callum watched, satisfied. Good, he said. Now you're thinking clearly. When the last image disappeared, Elodie set the phone down. She met his eyes. You're right about one thing, she said. No one would believe me. Callum smiled. Exactly. But they'd believe her. The smile faded. What? He asked. My sister, Elodie said. They'd believe Imogen. Callum's jaw tightened. Leave her out of this. She doesn't have your last name, Elodie continued, her voice steady, thoughtful. She doesn't live in this house. She hasn't spent years being trained to doubt herself. Callum stepped closer, his tone sharpening. You're not going to drag her into your fantasies. Elodie shook her head gently. No, she said. I'm going to step out of mine. Callum's hand rose again, faster this time. Elodie flinched, not from fear, from timing. Her foot slipped on the polished floor as she stepped back. The movement was small, accidental enough to be believable, violent enough to be real. She fell, hard. Her shoulder struck the edge of the counter. Her head snapped sideways. Pain exploded behind her eyes. Callum froze. For half a second, he looked like a man seeing consequences for the first time. Then instinct took over. Get up, he hissed. Get up. Elodie stayed on the floor. Blood trickled from a small cut near her hairline, warm and unmistakable. Callum stared at it. The room changed. This was no longer control. This was evidence. What have you done? He whispered. Elodie looked up at him from the floor. Her vision blurred, but her mind was razor-sharp. You pushed me, she said softly. Callum's face drained of color. I didn't... You were angry, Elodie continued, calm as glass. I threatened you. I fell. Callum shook his head. You're insane. Elodie reached for the edge of the counter and pulled herself upright, wincing just enough to sell the pain. You should leave, she said, before this gets worse. Callum stared at her, breath shallow. Then he looked at the blood again. And for the first time, he was afraid. He grabbed his coat and keys, movements frantic now, uncontrolled. You're doing this on purpose, he said. You think this will save you? Elodie met his eyes. No, she said. I think this will end you. The front door slammed. Silence returned to the house, Not arranged. Not controlled. Real. Elodie slid down the counter and sat on the kitchen floor, her body shaking now that she allowed it to. She touched her head. Blood on her fingers. Real blood. Real pain. Real proof. Her phone buzzed. A message from Imogen. Imogen, are you okay? I feel sick. I don't know why. Elodie stared at the screen. Then she typed. Elodie, we need to meet. Tonight. And we need to switch. She sent it. She leaned her head back against the cabinet and closed her eyes. Because the truth was no longer theoretical. It was no longer emotional. It was logistical. Callum believed he had complete control, and that belief had just become his greatest weakness. Elodie did not clean the blood right away. She sat on the kitchen floor longer than she needed to, her back against the cabinet, breathing slow and deliberate. Pain pulsed behind her eyes, sharp enough to anchor her to the moment. She welcomed it. Pain was honest. Pain didn't rewrite itself later. When she finally stood, the room looked different. Not damaged. Exposed. She washed her hands carefully, watching diluted red spiral down the drain. She pressed a cloth to the cut on her head, wincing just enough to acknowledge what had happened. Then she packed a small bag. Nothing sentimental. Nothing traceable. She left the house before Callum could come back. They met in a quiet car park near the river. Sodium lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a washed-out orange that flattened features and softened shadows. The sort of place cameras existed, but no one ever looked closely. Imogen arrived first. She stood beside her car, arms crossed tightly, eyes scanning the darkness like she expected something to emerge from it. When Elodie stepped into the light, Imogen froze. "Oh my God," she whispered. Elodie touched the bandage at her hairline. "It looks worse than it is." Imogen crossed the space between them in 3 steps and caught Elodie's face in her hands, inspecting her with trembling urgency. "He did this," Imogen said. Not a question. Elodie nodded once. Imogen's breath hitched. "I told you not to." "I know." Silence swallowed them. The river moved behind them, dark and indifferent. "We can't go to the police," Imogen said finally. "Not yet." "I know," Elodie replied. Imogen stared at her. "Then what are we doing here?" Elodie met her sister's eyes. "We're going to make him lose control." Imogen shook her head. "That's not—" "Yes," Elodie said calmly. "It is." She stepped back and took Imogen in fully. The same face, the same height, the same voice when softened just slightly. What had once been a childhood trick now carried weight. "Callum believes he owns patterns," Elodie continued. "My routines, my reactions, my fear." Imogen swallowed. "And you think switching places—" "I don't think," Elodie said. "I know." She took a breath. "He knows how to hurt me. He doesn't know how to hurt you." Imogen looked away. "You're asking me to walk into your marriage. I'm asking you to walk into his blind spot." The hum of the lights filled the space between them. Imogen laughed once, short, disbelieving. "This is insane." "Yes," Elodie said, "but it's also precise." She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, opening a gallery. Photos, dates, times. Every bruise, every threat. "Every note," Elodie said. "I've been documenting quietly for months. I just didn't know what it was for until tonight." Imogen stared. "You've been living like this? Alone?" Elodie didn't answer. Imogen's jaw tightened. "All right," she said suddenly. "If we do this, if we actually do it, then we do it properly." Elodie nodded. "We do it clean." They sat in Imogen's car, doors locked, windows fogging slightly from their breath. Rules were established quickly. Imogen would move into Elodie's house. Elodie would disappear into Imogen's life. Phones swapped. Clothes exchanged. habits mapped. Elodie wakes at 5:47, Imogen said, committing it to memory. Coffee at 6:30, milk measured, no sugar. He hates clutter, Elodie added. He hates surprises. He hates when I'm silent unless he's speaking. Imogen nodded slowly. He won't suspect me. No, Elodie said. He'll underestimate you. They looked at each other. For the first time that night, they smiled, not with humor, with intent. Callum returned to the house near midnight. The lights were off. Elodie's car was gone. For a moment, relief washed over him, then irritation. He checked his phone. No messages. He walked through the house, opening doors, calling her name once. Not loudly, not with concern. More like a landlord confirming vacancy. He reached the kitchen, saw the faint smear of blood he'd missed on the edge of the counter. His chest tightened. He wiped it away with his sleeve. By morning, he told himself, this would be manageable. Everything always was. By dawn, the exchange was complete. Imogen stood in Elodie's bedroom, dressed in Elodie's clothes, hairstyled exactly the way Callum preferred. She practiced Elodie's posture in the mirror, shoulders slightly rounded, chin lowered, expression neutral. She breathed like Elodie, slow, careful. Downstairs, Elodie stood in Imogen's flat, pulling on a jumper that smelled unfamiliar. She felt lighter already, less watched. Phones buzzed simultaneously. Callum. Where are you? Imogen waited 3 seconds before replying. Imogen, as Elodie. I went for a walk. Needed air. A pause. Then, Callum. Be home before I am. Imogen's fingers hovered over the screen. She typed. Okay. The simplicity pleased him. That was the danger. At dinner that night, Callum watched Elodie closely. Imogen moved carefully, copying habits, mirroring restraint. But there were differences. Small ones. She held eye contact a fraction longer. She asked one question too many. She didn't apologize when she spilled water. Callum noticed. Are you feeling all right? He asked lightly. Imogen smiled. I'm fine. Callum's gaze sharpened. The words were right. The tone wasn't. Later, when his hand slid toward her wrist, Imogen didn't flinch. She looked at him instead. The contact lingered too long. Callum withdrew his hand slowly. Something cold moved behind his eyes. 2 weeks later, Callum made his move. He invited Elodie to a firm event, public, crowded, controlled. Imogen attended, and did something Elodie never would have done. She spoke, confidently, intelligently, without checking his face first. Callum watched the room respond to her. He smiled for appearances, but inside, something cracked. That night, when they were alone, he confronted her. You're changing, he said. Imogen met his gaze. People do. His hand tightened on the glass he was holding. You don't, he said. Not without permission. Imogen smiled faintly, and Callum realized, with a sharp, unwelcome jolt, that the woman beside him was no longer predictable, not controllable. For the first time, uncertainty entered the house. Across town, Elodie received the news she'd been waiting for. A call from D.I. Rowan Pike. We've reopened a file, he said. Not officially, but enough to ask questions. Elodie closed her eyes. Imogen's voice echoed in her memory. If we do this, we do it properly. Meanwhile, Callum began to tighten his grip. Too late. Because control, once questioned, does not return quietly. And the woman beside him, the one he believed he owned, was already dismantling him from the inside. Callum did not raise his voice. That was the first mistake people made when trying to understand him. They expected shouting, volatility, something obvious enough to point at later. Callum believed in damage that left no fingerprints. In the days after the firm event, he adjusted his routines. Not dramatically. Not in ways anyone else would notice. He started coming home earlier. He canceled dinners without explanation. He asked questions that sounded like interest and landed like audits. Imogen noticed everything. She answered carefully, keeping Elodie's rhythms but introducing just enough friction to unsettle him. Silence where compliance had once lived. Calm where apology used to rush in. Callum watched. He always watched. The house began to feel smaller, not because walls moved, because attention did. Callum occupied doorways more often, standing just slightly too close when Elodie passed him. He corrected small habits. "You're holding the knife wrong. That's not where we keep the keys. You didn't used to forget this." Imogen absorbed it without reaction. What he didn't understand was this: fear had taught Elodie to minimize herself. Imogen had never learned that lesson. When Callum placed a hand on her shoulder one evening, too firm, too possessive, Imogen met his eyes and didn't look away. The pause stretched. Callum removed his hand first. The house registered it. Elodie lived carefully now. Imogen's flat gave her anonymity. A different postcode, a different routine, a different life. She walked without feeling followed. She slept without listening for footsteps. She met D.I. Rowan Pike in neutral places, cafes near train stations, a bench overlooking a busy square. Rowan did not promise outcomes. He promised process. "Your husband's respected," he said once. "That doesn't make him innocent. It makes him insulated." Elodie slid photographs across the table. Dates, times, consistency. Rowan studied them longer than before. "This doesn't prove intent," he said, "but it establishes pattern." "Patterns break," Elodie replied. "When pressure changes." Rowan looked up. "What pressure?" Elodie didn't answer, because if she explained, he would stop her. The solicitor, Maeve Ellison, was more direct. "You're taking a significant risk," Maeve said, folding her hands. "Identity deception complicates everything." "I know." "If this backfires," Maeve continued, "he will argue entrapment, manipulation, mental instability." Elodie nodded. "He already does." Maeve held her gaze. "Then make sure he's the one who overreaches." Callum began to feel watched. Not by cameras, by reactions. At work, Hugo Pembroke grew distant. Conversations cut short. Meetings postponed. At home, Elodie seemed different. Not rebellious. Worse. Unimpressed. Callum invited friends over. A test. Imogen performed flawlessly. Warm, restrained, agreeable. She laughed at the right moments, offered drinks, asked polite questions. Callum watched guests respond to her, not as decoration, as presence. That night, after everyone left, he confronted her. "You embarrassed me," he said. Imogen tilted her head. "How?" "You spoke out of turn." "I answered a question." "You corrected me." Imogen shrugged lightly. "You were wrong." The silence that followed was thick. Callum stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're forgetting who you are." Imogen smiled faintly. "No," she said. "I'm remembering." His hand rose, then stopped. Something had shifted. He felt it. The line he'd always known exactly where to place now blurred. Control, once absolute, had become uncertain. And uncertainty frightened him. Callum hired a private investigator. Quietly, professionally. He didn't ask about Elodie. He asked about Imogen. Patterns, addresses, employment, habits. The report came back thin. Too thin. Callum stared at the pages late one night, jaw tight. 2 women. Identical. Lives that suddenly overlapped too cleanly. A thought occurred to him. distant at first, then louder. No, he dismissed it, because believing it meant admitting he had lost sight of his own house. The disaster arrived disguised as routine, a late night. A glass dropped in the kitchen, a raised voice that crossed a line he hadn't meant to cross. Imogen stepped back, not in fear, in calculation. Callum grabbed her wrist, harder than before. "Don't," she said quietly. He froze, not because of the word, but because of how it was said. Not pleading, not frightened. Recorded. Imogen's phone lay on the counter, screen dark. Callum released her. "What are you doing?" he asked. Imogen met his gaze. "What you taught me." He laughed, sharp and brittle. "You think you're clever." "I think," she said evenly, "that you're sloppy when you're angry." Callum's breath came shallow. For the first time, the mask cracked. The next morning, Callum was summoned to a review. Not an accusation. Not yet. Just questions. Rowan Pike sat across from him, expression neutral. "Domestic disturbance calls," Rowan said. "No charges, just noise." Callum smiled easily. "Neighbors exaggerate." Rowan nodded. "They do." He slid a photograph across the table, a wrist, finger-shaped bruising, time-stamped. Callum's smile faltered, just for a breath. "That could be anyone," he said. Rowan leaned back. "It could." Callum left the station calm on the surface, shaking underneath. Because he understood something now. The woman beside him, the one he believed he owned, had learned how to use his rules against him. And worse, she wasn't afraid. That night, Callum stood alone in his study, staring at the notes he'd once written with confidence. Names, reminders, warnings. He crossed out Imogen with force, then stopped. His phone buzzed, a message from Elodie. "We need to talk." Callum stared at the screen. Outside, the house remained perfectly still. Inside, control collapsed, not with noise, but with certainty. Because Callum Wren finally understood the truth too late. He was no longer managing the situation, he was inside it. Callum did not sleep. He lay on his back, eyes open, listening to the house breathe around him, the ticking clock in the hallway, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft, deliberate silence that had always meant safety. Tonight, it meant exposure. Beside him, Elodie lay turned away, her breathing slow and even. Too even. He watched the rise and fall of her shoulder, counting the seconds between breaths. Controlled. Always controlled. That was when it hit him. Not as a revelation, but as a confirmation of something he had been resisting for days. The woman beside him was not afraid. Elodie had always been afraid. Fear had shaped her, smoothed her, made her predictable. This woman was not smooth. This woman was waiting. Callum sat up slowly, careful not to wake her. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood, feeling the cold floor ground him. He moved through the dark toward the study. The study light came on, and there, on the desk, lay the final proof he hadn't wanted to see. The phone. Not her phone. The wrong case. The wrong charger. The wrong habits. Callum picked it up. No passcode. That alone was enough. He opened the messages and saw the thread. Imogen. He suspects. Stay calm. Unknown. I am calm. Imogen. You have to be. This only works if he believes. Callum's breath caught. His hands tightened around the phone until his knuckles whitened. So that was it. Not madness. Not rebellion. Strategy. The sound that left his mouth was not a shout. It was something quieter. More dangerous. A laugh without warmth. He set the phone down carefully and turned off the study light. He went back upstairs. Imogen felt him before she saw him. The air shifted. The mattress dipped. She turned her head slightly. Callum sat beside her on the bed, his face calm, composed, terrifyingly gentle. "You're very good," he said softly. Imogen said nothing. "You almost convinced me," he continued, "but you made one mistake." She rolled onto her back, meeting his eyes. "Which one?" she asked. "You forgot," Callum said, "that I know how my wife sleeps." The word wife hung between them. Imogen's heart beat faster now, but her voice remained steady. "I know exactly who you are," Callum said. "And I know exactly what you're trying to do." Imogen didn't deny it. That was his second shock. "You think switching places makes you safe," Callum said. "You think you've outsmarted me." He leaned closer. "But you walked into my house." Imogen sat up slowly. "This is where you miscalculated," she said. Callum smiled. "Did I?" "Yes," Imogen replied, "because I came prepared." She reached for the bedside table. Callum moved faster. His hand closed around her wrist with sudden violence, dragging her toward him. The restraint vanished. The mask dropped. "You think you're clever?" he hissed. "You think anyone will believe you?" Imogen's phone slid from the table to the floor, screen lighting up as it landed. Recording. The red dot blinking. Callum froze. The moment stretched. Imogen met his gaze, breathing hard now. "You should let go." Callum released her slowly. Too late. Footsteps sounded downstairs. A knock at the front door. Firm, authoritative. Not neighbors, not friends. Callum's face drained of color. Imogen stood, shaking but upright. "You wanted control," she said. "This is what it costs." The door opened. D.I. Rowan Pike stepped inside, flanked by uniformed officers. Callum straightened instinctively, smoothing his shirt. The performance returned, but something vital was missing. Confidence. "What's this about?" he asked. Rowan's gaze moved from Callum to Imogen's wrist. Red. Marked. Undeniable. "We received a call," Rowan said. "Domestic disturbance. Ongoing. Escalated." Callum laughed lightly. "This is absurd." Rowan didn't smile. Imogen spoke then, voice trembling just enough to be believable. "He grabbed me," she said. "He threatened me." Callum turned on her. "You're not even—" Rowan raised a hand. "Sir." Callum stopped. For the first time, he was being interrupted. Rowan stepped closer. "We also have recordings, messages, documentation." Callum's mouth opened. No words came out. Rowan's voice remained even. "You're coming with us." The house felt suddenly very small. As they led Callum toward the door, he turned back once, eyes locking on Imogen. This time, there was no charm, only fury. "You think this ends me?" he said. "You don't know what you've started." Imogen held his gaze. "I know exactly what I started." The door closed behind him. The sound was final. Imogen sank onto the sofa, shaking now that the danger had passed. Minutes later, Elodie stepped inside. They stared at each other. Then Elodie crossed the room and pulled her sister into a fierce embrace. "It's done," Imogen whispered. "He knows." Elodie nodded. That was always going to happen. They held each other as the house, once a prison, stood silent and stripped of power. The house did not change overnight. That was the first lesson. Morning arrived the way it always had. Pale, undecided light slipping through the curtains, the street outside resuming its careful routines. Cars passed. Someone jogged by with headphones in. The world did not pause because a man had been taken from his home the night before. Elodie stood in the kitchen and watched the kettle boil. She half expected it not to click on at 6:30. It did. Control, she realized, lingered even after its source was removed. It lived in habits, in anticipation, in the body. Imogen sat at the table, hands wrapped around a mug she had not yet touched. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving a hollow quiet behind it. "They'll let him out," Imogen said finally. "Yes," Elodie replied. "Not pessimistic, practical." "And then?" Elodie turned from the counter. "Then we keep going." Callum was released on bail within 48 hours. The conditions were strict but limited. No contact, temporary relocation, ongoing investigation. His solicitor was efficient, his colleagues cautious, his reputation bruised, not broken. Hugo Pembroke did not return Elodie's calls. Maeve Ellison did. "This will take time," Maeve said. "He'll argue misidentification, consent, manipulation." "Let him," Elodie said. Maeve paused. "You understand what this costs, don't you?" Elodie looked at Imogen across the room. "Yes." The press caught the scent quietly. Not headlines, questions. A respected partner questioned. A domestic incident under review. Sources speaking off the record. Callum released a statement. Measured. Regretful. Vague. Personal matters are being exaggerated. I deny all allegations. The old language. Elodie read it without reaction. Imogen, however, laughed. Once, sharp and bitter. "He still thinks words can fix this." "They used to," Elodie said. D.I. Rowan Pike called weekly, sometimes with updates, sometimes with warnings. "Your husband's counsel is pushing hard," he said. "They're trying to discredit you. Both of you." "How?" Elodie asked. "History," Rowan replied. "Mental health suggestions, family instability." Imogen closed her eyes. Rowan continued, "But they can't erase consistency, and they can't undo the recordings." Silence followed. Then Rowan added, "Quieter now. You were careful." Elodie didn't respond. Careful was another word for survival. The hearing was not dramatic. No shouting, no confession, just evidence laid out patiently, dates, patterns, recordings played without commentary. Callum sat at the table in a tailored suit, expression composed. He did not look at Elodie. When asked if he wished to speak, he declined. That, too, was control. Until it wasn't. The ruling came weeks later. Charges upheld, protective orders extended, professional consequences unavoidable, not destruction. Accountability. Elodie exhaled for the first time in months. They did not return to the house. Elodie sold it. Imogen helped pack. In the final room, Elodie paused before the mirror where she had once practiced being acceptable. She touched the glass, not in anger, in acknowledgement. They left the keys on the counter and closed the door behind them. Months later, Elodie sat in a small flat of her own, sunlight warming the floor. No routines enforced, no rules spoken. Her phone buzzed. A message from Imogen. "Coffee later?" Elodie smiled. "Yes." She stood, stretched, and let the quiet exist without meaning. Control had once shaped her life. Now, absence did. And that, she realized, was enough.